you tend to get those questions with older folks that go through the bruises and the cuts.
All right, don't be ageist. All right, what is going on, certified homies? Welcome to another episode of From A to B. You have Shiva, and I'm joined by Ben, the Zen Labay. He's a certified homie, previous employer over at Speero, but he's currently the CEO at Speero. First time drunk person on the podcast.
No, I'm
so
not
we're really excited.
I just have to have a drink to be interviewed by Shiva. So.
to deal with me. I'm aware of the effect I have on my employers. Also, running the EXL, I guess rebranded EXL conference in Austin, Texas, which I will be a part of, and I'm super excited for.
Yeah, I'm going to have you possibly maybe as an MC. This is to be determined, but for the viewers out there, hit me up. If you think that's a great idea, ping me and give me some feedback, give me some data on whether that's a good idea or not to have Shiva as the MC.
I support this initiative. Get all the love from me everywhere, all the time, always. Yeah. This is the way. I'll plug a promo code at the end of the podcast, so you have to listen to this episode in order to get the promo code. I get no kickbacks on it. I just want to see homies at the conference. I want to meet all of y'all, so this is $0 goes into my pocket. Just want to get more people at the conference because it's a fun as hell podcast. It's not a podcast. It might be a podcast. It's a conference, though. I might be more drunk than you. And it's 7 a.m. It's 9 a.m. my time. It's 5 p.m. your time.
5 p.m. my time, by the way. I'm in Europe right now.
Off to a great start. Okay, so Ben, the topic for today is around nailing your CRO experimentation interview. You are obviously a hiring manager in many respects, so I thought your POV on maybe what are some tips or tricks on how to totally nail your CRO interview, ways to kind of showcase your skills, talk about what you do, avoid pitfalls, traps, etc. Really wanted to have you on there. So let me start with this first question. When you are interviewing someone, let's just say for a strategist position, something like that, what are some things you generally hope to learn in 60 minutes with talking to that person?
First of all, we have a pretty fun process right now. It's taken us years and years to get there. When you ask a question like, what do you want to learn in 60 minutes? It's hard to answer because we have a multi-stage kind of process. And actually, there's going to be multiple interview with different folks on the team. The very first time you might touch with like an HR type of recruiter person that just kind of level sets on, hey, these are the basics. This is the salary. This is kind of the, range or whatever. What are your expectations with regards to that? Do you want to stop here or not? Then there's going to be another interview that I typically hold as the first primary hiring manager that's actually and that's where I'll start to really answer your question, but I think we'll go further than that. In the first 60 minutes as a hiring manager, I actually don't really care about their skill set per se. In theory, they should be talking to me because they should be roughly good. We should be impressed by their experience and their resume, and there should be some sort of fit. So I go in and I just say, hey, Shiva, talk to me about your last 3 roles and answer 3 questions for each of them. Tell me what you were hired to do. Tell me some struggles that you had there, and then tell me anything that you shipped and you're most proud of. Those are the 3 big things I want to know for the last 3 organizations that you worked at. And I specifically want to poke and push and double click on the areas that you struggled. Was it political? Was it a push-pull movement that moved you from that job to the next? Were you able to handle weirdness in whatever kind of organizational environment that was there? If so, how did you handle it? This is kind of the soft skill side stuff that I like to get out from the hiring manager perspective.
So on the side of the person being on the other side of the screen, right? You are being interviewed for a role. What you're effectively saying is you have to be able to broadcast, showcase how you were able to deal with problems, how you were problem solve, or how you would maybe politic, or how you have managed relationships, work with people. Is that fair to say?
That's one of the 3 questions per past employment. Correct, right? The other 2, it's what are the biggest things you were proud of? What were you hired to do? Those are a little bit more, less soft skill, more hard skill, more.
Well, let's hold on. On the soft skill side, What are some green flags that you would say, okay, this person checks the box, it makes sense? Or maybe I'll flip it around and say, what are some red flags for someone when they're trying to nail the interview? How would they communicate like, oh, maybe you as Ben as a hiring manager might be like, I don't know if they have the soft skills I'm looking for.
There's one framework or model in my head that I think about, and
Of
that's
course, there's a framework.
it's like a push pull kind of thing. Were they pushed from that job, or were they pulled from that job? Meaning, I had all these problems, and if they were fired, they were pushed out, right? If they had all these problems and they just didn't like it, and so they had to go get another job, that's a push situation. Versus a pull, I had this opportunity that I couldn't go away from, so I had to leave this place. I really liked it. The people there were great. And so they might be talking about their hardest struggles there from like a content perspective, like some of the actual material and work matter, rather than like, oh, that place was a dumpster fire and my boss was like a maniac or whatever. That totally happens. I wouldn't say that's a red or that might be like a yellow flag or something like that. But the green flag is seeing a pattern of pull moments, and this interview being representing a pull moment as well. Like, oh, I just wasn't even on the job market and this job's just so perfect for me. I feel like I've always wanted it. I had to jump on it. So you want to hear things like that.
To push a little bit on that, it could be that sometimes the environment isn't the best fit for you. And you like, would you not say it might be the green flag to recognize I can't succeed in this scenario? I've done all I can. And instead, what I need to do is change it up, because if I continue to try and grind away at the situation, for example, I'm sure you're no stranger to CROs being in positions where the hippo sucks, they have no resources. Perhaps they were sold a job that you'll have everything. And when they actually step into it, they're like, oh, actually, I have nothing available to me. I can't be successful at my job. When I look at my career and I say, I want to continue to grow, I have drive, and every time they're getting stonewalled. I think you're right. Sometimes CROs might not push enough when they need to. And I'm sure that's true with most jobs in general. But like, how do you suss out maybe someone who's like, I'm in a situation where I'm just never going to be successful, so I have to leave so I can be successful and someone will match my skill set, versus I didn't even try and I hate everything because I am a terrible employee. Like, how do you I know that's a difficult loaded question to ask, but I think it's also fair to recognize the other side.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's super hard. I don't have any perfect answer here. I will say it reminds me of like the characteristic of like what you might call awareness, like being self-aware. Like, so if you come back to that, I didn't have the right resources. So I would expect, if you're aware enough to recognize that you're going to ask me like, hey, Ben, what resources am I going to have? What can I expect? There's a lot of green flags all across the board when I get questions about, okay, your job description said XYZ. What about ABC? Who's this? What's that? How's the topology of the team? Am I going to be able to speak to the people that I'm going to be working with? The structural questions there really speak to awareness. They know who they are. You tend to get those questions with older folks that go through the bruises and the cuts.
All right, don't be ageist.
Be ageist a little bit. Experiencist, not ageist, but like when you go through and you get the bruises and cuts of those situations, you're going to ask better questions next time.
I believe what you're saying is, if I were to jump into a role, or let's say you were interviewing me for this role, and I were to ask questions like, what's your 401k match percentage, right? Like, ask those questions, obviously, but at some point.
No, that's the HR man. Remember, we're talking about the hiring manager now. So don't ask that right now. Ask that to like the HR person or something like that.
The thoughtful questions for you that are green flags are, I'm in this situation. If I potentially might run into a challenge, like asking about resourcing, asking about relationships, asking about processes, your curiosity towards how you would fit into the job, it matches like, if I'm in this situation, this is how I would work. And this is how I foresee things working, shows the proactivity towards, this is how I think I'll be successful in this role. And then you ask that question saying like, does that match you and your expectations, hiring manager? Something like that?
Yeah, and I might be really biased in answering this question. I mean, being like, I mean, all of the like sort of the operational frameworks that I think about. So I would ask, like, what is I would ask questions that would get to what is the drumbeat of your organization? How quickly do you change your OKRs? Who does it? Do we work in pods and squads? Do we have like weekly stand-ups? I'd be really interested in like what that drumbeat looks like and feels like and get the perspective from multiple people.
Is it fair to say asking about the day-to-day is like a sliver of that? But not just saying what is the day-to-day, but you're asking like, how would I be working around everything that you have? But also there's a piece of like, what are the business OKRs? What are things that the business values?
How are leadership handing problems down to product owners and product managers to solve them? Are they, are you running as a feature team? Are you running as a product operating model? Knowing how an organization ships, are you cascading roadmaps? Or are you cascading meaning, right? And that's hard to suss out, but I think that applies to a small organization like a 50-person agency versus, or a big, huge, organization that's got hundreds of people. So I still think that matters. And that kind of gets at like, am I stepping into chaos? And if so, how so? And is this defined? Is it a new role versus been there a while? You have other people that are doing it similarly to me that I can talk to, questions like that.
So on that point, right, like if you figure out they're in a pod structure and they have things set up in a pod related way, if you could then speak to that after you ask that question and you've sussed it out, if you as a person trying to be hired, if you get to then speak towards your experience working in a pod, or if you haven't worked in a pod, maybe you speak towards how you would work in a pod and say, these are the skills and the strengths I bring to the table in a pod structure, and reinforce like, yes, I actually love working in a pod structure because this is how I work and this is how I see things working. Green flag, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you could pivot, and hopefully some of that stuff should be in the JD in the scenario in which you're kind of asking this kind of on the fly, trying to figure out a little bit deeper to the hiring manager, like, am I stepping into in front of a firing squad here or not, right? And if so, like, is this going to be good for me? That's another important thing too. Like sometimes that chaos will get you closer to your goal. Hopefully there's always a stepping stone situation, and there is chaos and uncertainty and being outside of the comfort zone. That's a good thing. I would say though, you put that into one of two buckets. There's being outside of the comfort zone of the content, which is like the whatever like subject matter expertise you want to be in. So you think about a CRO strategist, be outside your comfort zone with regards to the skill set that it takes to do that role. Or am I going to be, I'm somewhat senior now. I want more leverage. Am I going to be managing a team? So are you stepping into or out of your comfort zone with regards to managing people, managing a team? And that's more administrative. Are you looking to own a P&L? Very administrative, right?
Because it signals growth and experience, right? Or growth and like ambition, right? If you want to hire someone who's trying to persistently learn, persistently grow, persistently get better at what they're doing, almost in a meta way, that's the optimizer's mindset.
Yeah.
Right? Continuously figuring out how to make the website better, internalize that to optimizing yourself as a prospective employee or a current employee. You should always be trying to learn and get better.
I think you should be, maximizing two metrics always when you're, an employee, so to speak. The amount of value that you add and the amount of value that you gain comes in the form of learning. And those are opposed to each other. You can't always do them at the same time. And there's usually 2-year loops there. So in the beginning, you're not adding value, right? For the first 6 months, right? You're probably not adding a ton of value, but after 6 months, you start to really kick it. And then year 2, that's when you really add maximum value to the organization that you're with. But then after that, after 2 years, you deserve a lot more. You need to push yourself. You need to push your title. You need to push your responsibilities, push that comfort zone to where you are learning again. You're taking back the learning, because in the beginning, that first 6 months, the value to you hopefully should be maximized, right? How much you're learning, how much you're growing, you're getting into a new position, new role, new responsibilities. So you're gaining all of this stuff where the organization you're not really helping them a ton for 6 months or so. And so it levels off out of a year. The organization gets their year after that. And then boom, you got to either move on, or you got to, within the same organization, push yourself to play around with those two metrics again.
So I know we talked quite a bit about kind of the softer skills, things that are more ingrained, more innate. I want to go a little bit deeper into some of the hard skills, I guess. The opposite of soft. Let's just keep moving from there.
I think it could be like, again, there's two other areas of questions that I go into. It's like, what were you hired to do? I like that one. And then what were you kind of most proud of, or like, what were some of the big accomplishments, things like that? With those two questions, I don't want to hear, let's go back to your green flag, red flag thing. I don't like to hear like, oh, I worked on this with this team and we worked towards these goals and we did things together. And I mean, I like teamwork. That's fine. But I want to hear that things got shipped and things got pushed out there and they were real and they're tangible. Like I created this data center hub and we expanded the service line to this X or Y, or I built a new team to focus on this new product channel and we did this thing. We grew revenue from, like, I'm looking at a resume right now that this guy grew an e-commerce shop 250,000 a year to 98 million a year in 5 years. He was like the marketing manager during that growth. That's a little like interesting for a marketing manager. It'd be better for, of course, a CEO. Like that would be the accomplishment. But to know that he went through that story arc is interesting, and so it makes me dig a little bit further. There is a distinction, what I might call, between the answers of like A players and B players or C players there. The A players will describe accomplishments in terms of metrics and things that were shipped, right? They won't say, I did conversion rate optimization for these brands. Like that's like a B, C player answer. Like you're looking for specific.
Wait, help me understand that. Why? What about it is not helpful?
Well, like say you come from another agency and you worked on some accounts. It doesn't tell me anything about like how you were successful with working on those accounts. It just means that you were doing a job. You were hired to do a job and you were there. You were in the seat. It didn't talk to me about the performance.
Right. So like to be clear, what you're saying is if that was in the resume, I guess that's fine. But what you're saying is in the interview process, if someone asks, what was your role? And you said, I did CRO. That's not helpful. It doesn't explain any of the tactical things that you did.
Yep.
Versus you say, I did CRO, but, or I guess, yes, and, right? I did CRO and I did all of these tactical things. I ran a bunch of research. Like you give more tactical, concrete things rather than just a generic top line headline that means nothing. You want specific examples.
Correct. Like running a bunch of research is also analogous to like a vague thing that everybody does.
True.
It's easy to say. But to your meta point, yeah, or to the way that you were going, yeah, exactly.
As tactical as you can be, just say like
concrete examples, things that were shipped. With Speero, we put names of people on blueprints and blog posts, and when I say names of people, like employees, right? Like we get them to ship things. So they could say, I like, check out this material that I wrote and that I pushed on. Like there's this thing that I shipped and I did. Like you want to see these concrete things. Yeah.
So I want to get a little bit deeper into like the CRO mindset. I think the soft skills stuff is pretty helpful. But when we talk about specific to CROs, one thing I'm very interested on is you talked about shipping, right? I think that's important to know the value you delivered, the things you actually did, the things you contributed to, impacts that you made, super valuable. When we talk specifically about CRO, let's just say this. What are some green flags that you would look for a CRO to have done so that CRO can maybe take that in the bank and say, let me get ahead of the curve and let me explain this. When someone asks, so what did you do at X company? Like, what are some tactical things that you might look for to say, this is great. I love that this person called this out. Like, is it testing velocity? Is it stuff like I've run research? Is it talking about test wins? Is it talking about process? Like, what are some things that you're like, fuck yeah, this person gets it?
To me, there's a couple, sort of attitudinal or like base kind of like statistical kind of things. Like I love people that worked in some high velocity programs. I mean, that changes the way you think about things. Whether it's good or bad, it means that you're shipping things quickly. So you're getting things through a political maze of getting things out. Even if it's like for a small e-commerce shop with just like one CEO doing like green light, red lighting, that's still hard to get out 10 tests a month. That's kind of a one side of it, so shipping. The process side of thing is interesting because I'm a process geek, but it's a trap as well. Like process is also a data trap. And so I'd like to see someone who's aware enough to understand the balance between using process to stand on to get to what you want to faster rather than building up process to hold you down. which happens a lot. Like the process frameworks and all this stuff are built literally to be broken. So we should stand on top of the shoulders of these process stuff. And so I love when people speak to that attitude. It's very yes and. You mentioned yes and earlier. I love kind of that yes and side of things. And
improv, baby.
Very personally, green light is like if I see signs of yes and, I freaking love it. Like that's who I want to be with. That's who I want to have drinks with. That's who I want to work with. It's just yes and people. People that the plan was supposed to go this way, but it didn't go. It didn't, but that's okay. Let's go this way now. Let's have fun with it.
So something I've run into hiring for CROs is people will fixate so much on your metrics. Are you going to talk about velocity or KPIs? When I actually take them steps back to explain their process, that's when they flounder and they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. I totally get the idea that as a hiring manager, you want to make sure that they actually shipped things, they've actually done things. If they exclusively talk in the theoretical, but they can't actually do anything, that's bad, right? But the flip side, if they only talk about the things that they shipped, but they can't talk process, to me, that's huge red flag. Because that's important too. If they say we lifted conversion rates by like 200% and all they're talking about is their goals, and I say, that's real cool. Give me an example of a test that you run. And they're like, well, we tested sticky CTAs. I'm like, okay, fine. What's the research behind that? And then they say, I commented checklist on someone's LinkedIn post and I had a check, like that kind of bullshit, right? How do you suss out that they actually have a frame of reference, or I guess a process that they work towards that leads towards the proper solutions? And then maybe on the flip side, what advice would you give on someone to make sure that they explain the process and their thoughts behind getting towards the results, but make sure you talk about the results, but make sure you also focus on how you got there so people don't think this person's bullshit and all they're saying is results without any knowing what they're doing, you know?
It depends on what I'm hiring that CRO to do. If I'm there, if I need like a stats expert kind of data scientist, then that question set, that it's not necessarily process there. It's more about understanding data and understanding how to use data to make decisions.
Which in that case, you'd probably give them like a take-home something.
There's
to
some
just
take-home
check
stuff
their knowledge
there for sure. Yeah. There's some like a scenario and then a read back in terms of like, you know, getting their ability to mainstream that data, mainstream that story to stakeholders, right? Which we need, right? Versus if I'm hiring a CRO to, you know, sort of manage accounts, so like not so much a specialist as like an analyst, but someone that's like managing accounts or something like that. The process there can be corrected. It can be tweaked out a little bit. I like to see signs of like good A/B tests.
I think you're biased.
Yeah, maybe.
So I think you're biased because you're talking about hiring for Speero where you have the processes in work, right? Versus if I'm a marketing manager at some company, I don't know CRO. That's why I'm hiring someone to come in who understands their shit. Let's say you're hiring a program manager or director of experimentation.
Speero does hiring support, by the way. We have a landing page on our site. So
all right, it's fucking subtle plug. I did not approve of this, but no. So that's what I'm more curious about. Like, I get your perspective. I want to know if I was a person hiring for a CRO manager position, or if I was a CRO working towards that position where I'm tasked with knowing everything. How can I project my knowledge and my process?
You're saying like you're hiring the CRO to come in and own and build the program within in-house,
exactly.
Right? So in that case, you need to see experience of this like been done. Like the capability needs to have been proven out already, right? So you want someone that's gonna work really well with others, lead a team, like own processes, be a little product manager-y, be a little CEO-y.
100% agree. Totally.
Like there's a metric set and you're gonna hold me accountable and I'm gonna move the needles up and to the right. And so there's a little bit of like micro CEO-y there. The product management manager is like perfect set there. You're going to look for those like shipped deliverables within the resume, in the top grading as well. But then in that task, talk to me about the flywheel. What flywheel would you set up considering our constraints? For example, X, Y, and Z, like traffic, inputs, teams, business units, whatever that might be. Like, how would you set up a flywheel and then go from like the first 90 days to a year from now, what would that look like? And how would you kind of manage that transition? There would be some open-ended questions, just like I said, but then also maybe you dive into some specifics on like parts of the process, like the research inputs or like how you're getting some of that data into the flywheel, things like that.
So you're talking a little bit more from the hiring manager perspective. That's what they should expect, right? From the CRO side, what tips would you give on that person explaining those maybe 30, 60, 90 days? What would be some tactical things that would be, okay, this person knows their shit. It's clear this person's thought through how they're approaching it from building the program out.
I would have a framework. I have a framework. It's like XOS system. It's some language that goes around in a flywheel. So I speak to that specific language. That's very generic though. What I would do to go to the next level is like, you need to adapt it to the context of the org. So the org has a team topology. What is that? How might you work with different teams? Your org has different business units that amount like volume of like traffic and inputs and stuff like that. You would adapt to the flywheel there. And so understanding that context of those inputs would help you sort of understand the components of the flywheel and what it would look like in the 90 days and what it would look like a year from there.
So back to the previous part of the conversation, right? The soft skills around how do you work within the organization, fleshing that out, asking the questions. Someone might, in an interview, a hiring manager might ask you, what would you do in your first 30, 60, 90 days? I think you would agree with this. It would be perfectly fine to say, I need to be a little bit deeper into it, but maybe you can ask some follow-up questions and say, like, what's the org structure? What teams could I be working with? What teams should I be working with, in your opinion? Get a lay of the land. Because I'm sure for you and for me, if I just answered a generic question without any curiosity towards how it would work, I wouldn't consider that person entirely qualified.
So yes, but, and I'm not going to do a yes and here, or maybe I will try it. Yes,
but.
And I would, yes. And.
That's basically your nice way of saying you're wrong. Here's the right answer.
I think you're no, it's a yes and. I can yes and this. Yes, and I would make sure not to forget about the importance of brute force speed. And velocity. So where that comes into play is like I have firsthand experience of seeing a sister company of mine fire a leader after a month because the lay of the land was still happening and nothing was shipped. A lot of talk, a lot of decks, a lot of storytelling, but nothing was shipped. I would say, yes, you need some lay of the land, but you need to balance brute force speed and strategic activity agendas. 90 days is going to look like this, but in month 1, we're going to do this at the very minimum as we get the lay of the land. Month 2, we're going to do this and this and this as we get more of lay of the land. Like you're still going to be shipping. You're still going to be pushing things out because you learn by doing. This is experimentation. Experimentation is the Trojan horse for learning, right? Like the only way to do is by shipping.
It's funny. I think this is probably worth a whole other topic of conversation around nailing your first 30 days as a CRO, right? Yeah. But that's a topic for another day. So one thing I wanted to ask you here, Ben, is thinking about a test case study. I think that's a pretty open-ended question that people ask, like, walk me through a test that you've run. And the test choice is important. The explanation is important. The research is important. That's something I use quite a lot to suss out a person's mentality, their thought process, how they approach experimentation. A red flag CRO, in my opinion, would be someone who, when I say walk me through a test process, they tested a bullshit best practice and they saw it won, and they don't give me any other results. There's no curiosity. It's just, we tested a thing and it won, and like that's all they give me. Versus the green flag, and this is what I love to discuss, is I maybe we'll talk about the research that went into a test and then it lost. I have an example of this. I don't want anyone to steal it, but I have an example of a test where back in the research, we ran a test, it totally tanked. We learned something and we retested a different hypothesis based on that, and then it won. And then talk about the insights, talk about the people involved, talk about all of that information. I think that's a very interesting way to suss out a person's thought process, but it's also a very interesting way to suss out that person's like how they worked with people. Because in that same question, if it's me, and they're trying to take credit for everything, that might be reflective of maybe how they work as a team. If they literally did everything on their own and they had no help because of organizational reasons, fine. But that could suss out that person's personality type if they brag about everything they did versus working as a team. But also, if their test choice when asking that question, and even if you have to answer that question, if you have to take 2 seconds to like think about it, that's fine. I don't think pauses in interviews is an issue. But like take the time and think about an appropriate test, maybe something that relates to that audience, maybe in hearing the conversation with the interview, give something that like, oh, I saw your website and I tested something like this before and this is the research and blah, blah, blah. Like I kind of just brain dumped a bunch of shit at you. Like, what do you think about that? If you were a hiring manager, like just what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what you've just nailed upon is trying to get them to demonstrate critical thinking. If I were to summarize what you did there, like
unique from a CRO lens.
Yeah, exactly. Like you use different variables and language, but it's like critical thinking. And how do you get that? How are you processing data critically? You know, in our jobs, we go from data to information to insights to action, and going through that progression is hard for a lot of people. Some people just go from information, or actually from data to information. They can't make that leap to insight. And then they get stuck because of politics and whatever that might be to go to action, right? You want to have someone demonstrate the ability to go all the way through there in a efficient and aware way, right? Being humble about it and so on. That's another note I might add to too, or like a sidebar on this is there's a book, Ideal Team Player is the book, and the principles or values are hungry, humble, and smart. And the smart is actually socially smart, not like IQ. It's more EQ.
Right.
Hungry,
like picking up on social cues and stuff.
Yeah. Being able to be aware and work on a team. Remember, it's a team sport, right? And then totally. Hungry is like you need them to be driven. And then humble, so you need all three. There's like a triad there. And when you're missing any one, like that's not good. They're out. They almost could be out, right? That's when you can have like A players that can be like on it. They're there, they're ambitious, they're amazing at what they do, their IQ is off the charts, but they're not humble and they don't have the EQ because of it. That's when you can have A players kind of get kicked off a team.
One thing I've always found in helping some of my friends with resumes and stuff is just, I think this is true with most things in the business world. So talking about presentations with executives, talking about your resume, talking about most things, add so what layers to what you're doing. So I ran a test that lifted conversion rates. So what? Well, it lifted revenue. Okay, so what? Well, we learned this insight. So what? Like keep on adding. You have a basis, and most of the time people can answer that base, but add context around when you say thoughtful, right? It's add the context. Add so what? The things that we do are so hyper fucking interesting. We should talk about it like it's interesting, not just talk about it like it's a thing that we did.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's kind of core to your point around like you're looking for people who's an A+ player, the hunger. If you're just like, all right, so Ben asked me a question. What did you like? Give me an example of a test that I ran. Oh, I tested a sticky CTA, it lifted conversion rate by 7%. Like, I don't want to hire that guy. Like, I want to hear that person say, dude, we tested a sticky CTA. It lifted conversion rate by 7%. It was so fucking cool because, well, first when we ran the test, the chat overlaid on it and it fucked up our results. We've figured out our QA process sucked. We had to fix that. Like, just be excited about this shit, man.
I think, I don't know, you can have a lot of introverts that it's hard to get excitement out of and are still really humble, hungry, and smart. So that's
true.
But I get 100%. And
it's not pure energy level. It's about the information that you're presenting.
Intrigue and interest and like seeing people lean in, like seeing people want to be involved rather than being impressed and like leaning back. Because that's when you're impressed, but not in a good way. Like you're being affected by things and you're reactionary versus being proactive and leaning in and wanting to take part and being curious.
It's so funny that lean in is an example of interest. I haven't leaned in once in this conversation, by the way, Ben. That should be an indication of how interesting you are.
Yeah. I'm leaning in, but just to get my glass of wine. So that's...
to deal with the rest of me. So let's wrap on this section here, Ben. If you had to like let's say, Ben, you're trying to give me advice, Shiva, as a person trying to break into CRO. I'm a junior CRO. I understand. I took all the CXL courses. I understand the principles. I'm trying to get my first job. What would be the Ben GPT of some tips, tricks, takeaways to make sure that I'm fully prepared for a conversation, both on the soft skill side and the hard skill side?
Know that job is how that job is a stepping stone to what you want to get to eventually. So put into perspective of your own missions and values, etc. 2, do your research because you know that it is the right stepping stone for you. Do the research on the hiring manager or the org. Get your question set ready right there. try to make it a pull conversation, not a push conversation situation. I mean, that's just sometimes it's beyond us. But 3, don't use AI, and be authentic in your responses and what you craft. I mean, that's just like, I recently processed, I swear, like 200. We have this pre-screener that we do. We ask like 3 open-ended questions. If they use AI and it's really apparent, if they do, it's very apparent, then they're out. Because you need, make it authentic. Like, don't misspell things, but use some jargon and slang. Be a little bit off center, because AI is going to be really good about being right on point.
You want to hire a human. You don't want to hire a bot.
Yeah, and I mean, we need people that use bots. I don't know, at this point in the decade that we're in or whatever, it's a turnoff. So that just kind of is what it is. I mean, you can leverage it to like frame your stuff, but use your own language there. That's a really tactical side thing that like we just throw them out, right? Because we feel they're not authentically interested. They're not being pulled to us. If they're not giving us that authentic, like in their own words, sort of in their own language sort of response, we feel it.
Yeah, it's a broader indication of basically just like, this is the amount of effort I'm putting into this. I don't care that much about it. Like, experimentation people, I think it's a very, very soft skill. We have to be passionate about what we do to get the buy-in, to continuously learn, grow, improve. If you're not that passionate about it, I think it could be fine for a job, but a lot of employers want to hire passion in employees that they get. So
yeah,
while sometimes a job can just be a job, you want to try and hire people who really are passionate and interested in what we do.
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot of interview questions that are derivatives of the 3 main ones I got, which were like, what were you hired to do? What were your accomplishments and what were your struggles? There's a lot of derivative questions of those core ones. And so that's a good framework to think about a lot and answer for yourself on the past few jobs, and to have some not canned answers there, but you know, you have thought about it before when you know, and so you're going to be a little bit more articulate as you spit it out again, right? That's all I can think of right now. I mean, I think ask a lot of questions, and again, that comes from the pull situation, not the push, right? You're authentically interested in that job. That's derivative of that job is the stepping stone that you see it to be.
All right, so I think that's a good place to wrap for this first section. Ben, what is it now time for?
Time to get to some shit.
No, it's time for shit you need to know. You have to say the words though. Fine, you know what? I'm just gonna keep this. That's fine.
All right, yeah. Let's get to know some shit.
Time for whatever section Ben said.
Time to get to know some shit. Yeah. Let's know some shit.
All right, let's go. Okay, so this is actually a listener question this week. Comes from the OG certified homie, Trina Moitra. She's a fellow homie at convert.com. I'll just say it. She's just an OG certified homie. She's awesome. Something that she had a question on is how to improve the bare bones execution in early stage experimentation programs. And she follows with this, like, how do we actually improve the like bare bones execution of experimentation early without dampening their enthusiasm for testing? The challenge I've seen a lot, and it's a hard thing to just create a generic rule for, but spinning the flywheel versus making sure the flywheel is actually in place is a very challenging conversation. It's not just do one thing and that's the best way to do it. And even Ben, I know you and I kind of agree to disagree on some things regarding this. So if you had to say some words of advice around how do we get experimentation, like the bare bones in place without spending 5 months setting up the program, which will then reduce the enthusiasm and experimentation. What are some of your thoughts here?
The question assumes responsibility. Like, we need to get this thing going. We need to ship some stuff. But to me, the first ingredient there is authority. Like, you need authority to do the things that you want to do.
Was that DAISY, like establishing a DAISY, for example?
No, it's more around like making sure that you have the authority to make the changes that you're looking to make. And so it's just getting either leadership like permission, you know, implicit or explicit or whatever that might be, or just the ability to make changes on this particular touch point, swim lane, whatever that might be. And then get the people in the same room on a weekly kind of like sprint basis that can do the thing. And then, so it's going to be your sort of orchestrator, your juggler. You might call them a product manager. You might call them a CRO. And it's going to be usually an engineer and a user designer, someone who's responsible for feasibility on the engineering side of things, and then someone who's responsible for usability on the sort of user design, customer advocacy, research side of things. So I'm very much in the camp of the product operating model. So engineer, designer, product owner. That's the classic triad. Maybe you don't even need a designer sometimes. Maybe you don't even need an engineer sometimes if you got some no-code stuff going on. So you just need whoever's there that can make those changes. But the first thing to start with is the authority to do the thing. So you're not like checking in, getting permission. You got 20 cooks in the kitchen situation. For that to happen, you likely have to have some accountability. So that owner, that person who's making the change, not only has responsibility, but they have accountability. So they need to measure what they're doing and be held accountable.
So you poo-pooed Daisy and you just explained to Daisy.
Daisy, or
you got to establish a Daisy. You got to establish the decider, the responsible, the contributor, the informed.
Yeah, but I just went more to the heart of it. Like, there's different versions of that. There's races. There's there's stuff like that. But yeah.
You just don't want to let me get this win. Sheesh. I said the smart thing. You're like, no, it's nothing like that. I'm just going to explain exactly what you said, though.
I've just seen those be created and put in drawers.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Just get forgetting.
You have to set a Daisy and actually follow it. That is entirely fair.
You have to get in the room with the people, virtual or otherwise.
Yeah, but it's not the fault of the Daisy, just to be clear. That's a fault of leadership.
I had some ex-girlfriend syndrome of the Daisy races thing. I don't know. Those are, whatever.
So I was just taking some notes. I think if we had to bullet out what you said, part one is establish authority. Like, you have to be able to actually implement shit. Otherwise, you kind of an L.
And that goes together with responsibility, accountability,
and
at the end,
and autonomy.
I would pair it right there. Yeah,
totally. So that's kind of step one. Step two is establish a meeting cadence, check-ins, establish frequent mechanisms for things to be connecting.
Yeah.
And then third would be establish what work needs to be done and then who does it.
Yeah.
So if engineering work needs to be done, get someone who can engineer,
My new favorite thing, it's sort of the latest hammer in my hand, is what I'm calling these data to action workshops. It's a derivative, or it's sort of an expansion of an ideation workshop. The idea is that you've identified an area that needs help, right? You have a problem. All right, the problem has been identified. So you know the area, you've got some context because you have a problem. So there's been some research, or you just, a problem has been handed down by product leadership or whatever that might be. So you've got some context of it. Maybe you've got some data like a drop-off rate or whatever. That's the context you go in. And then you get together, you get that triad together, you get a small working group together, you get your ideas out there on paper. You can vote on them. You can create some rigid hypotheses from those problem statements that you put there. But then you go through the explicit step of doing some feasibility of those ideas, some quick shuffling of those cards into a specific roadmap. So you do all of this in a single session, actually. And this has done wonders for having a really clear roadmap that you then come back to. This is the key. You come back to in a loop. In a 2-hour session, you create a strategic roadmap, and maybe it has 15 things. Maybe after 3 months, you only get to 8 of them, but you got to 8 of them. You come back and you look then again at your metric set. Okay, then you completed your story, and you complete the story with quantitative data. I got this many wins, or this many things got implemented and changed, or whatever. I got 1 of 8 wins, whatever. That's not a great rate, but that's what it is. But I got these 4 customer insights as well. So you have the outputs of what got put out, and then you got the impact, which is 1 win at least, maybe 1 save, right? And then also the customer insights on top of that. So you pair the quant with the qual in your storytelling of that full loop.
So I'm going to reel it back in here around the bare bones execution of early stage experimentation.
That's what get that workshop, get the people in the same meeting. That's what I'm saying. Like a data to action loop. I would start those, almost not week 2.
Trina's question, without dampening enthusiasm for experimentation, that does the exact opposite. Having that workshop, getting people excited to try and test out things does get people excited. So while you are working on the bare bones execution, replenishing your backlog with ideas, establishing a loose framework of things to try and test in the next couple months or so, you're still getting people excited while working towards that process of actually executing. So Win-win. Cool. All right. I know we're way over. This may be a record for the longest episode, but such is the life with Ben Labay. We've had many conversations that have taken hours. So, Ben, thank you so much for hopping on to discuss this very complex topic around nailing your CRO interview. And we'll definitely have you on for something. I think it'd be really fun to talk to you about nailing your first 30 days as a CRO. I think that'd be a really fun topic.
We'll come back to that. Yeah.
So, Ben, I know one thing we want to plug is the promo code for EXL coming up October
10th and 11th, the optional 9th, there's a workshop day with Ronnie Kohavi and some AI applications and experimentation.
With the homie Sean David, right?
The homie Sean David is going to be there. The conference itself over 2 days, just stellar lineup, just really good. Go to our site, check it out. Speero.com, hit the upper banner, you'll find the conference. And
what's the promo code for 35% off?
That's right, 35% off A to B promo. So it's ATOB promo, 35%.
And just to be clear, again, for the folks, I'm not getting compensated for this. This is just so I get to meet all of y'all awesome people. Ben did this as a courtesy for me. One last thing, Ben, I heard you're actually buying everyone drinks for EXL. Is that right?
Yeah. Easy. In the budget.
Are you also buying food?
Yes. Food, drink.
You're also putting Shiva up in a first-class hotel. Is that correct?
I didn't hear that one. Is that?
I think I did. I think we did. I think that was we'll take that offline. That's fine. We could talk about it.
Yeah. I've got a good couch at the venue. Yeah.
Just, I have a car that you could sleep in if you'd like. The chairs recline.
Yeah.
Cool. Ben, thank you so much for hopping on. I appreciate you for doing this.
Thanks,
I think there's some really awesome, actionable tips that people could take away. And they could follow you on LinkedIn. Any other things you want to plug?
No, follow me on LinkedIn. That's it.
Make sure you guys throw a bunch of shade his way. He would appreciate that.
I would.
You don't even know what shade means. Thanks, Ben.
Yep.